Howdy, I'm Russell Thornberry and I'm the host of the 2017 Clearwater Nap-In, which we're holding in central western Alberta in the foothills of the Canadian Rockies. So we gathered to make tools of stone, lithic art if you will. We are carrying on the skills that used to be common to the indigenous people of the world before metal became available to them. When they made any kind of tool they needed, whether it was an arrowhead or a spear point or a knife blade, they made it of stone. And originally, the tools of the trade were very simple. These were the tools, what we call a hammerstone today, which this hammerstone would hit the rock that they were shaping for the coarse work of removing the heavy mass of the rock down to what they wanted to finish, and a piece of antler tip to flake along the edges. So with this, they pressure flaked. With this is percussion flaking, actually one tool striking another. And I'm going to try to demonstrate with modern tools how that was done. I could do it with this. However, modern flint knappers for percussion will use something like this, a copper-capped bopper, or billet as we call it, and a pressure flaker, and both of these have copper tips. And questions often asked, why copper? Because it's softer than the rock we're working with. And even the hammerstones and antler tips that were originally used had to be softer. So the issue is that whatever tool you're using has to be softer than the material you're working with. The reason is so that when you hit that edge, it will grab a bit and stick, and the copper makes that happen. So that's why we use copper tools. In this part of the country, we are lithic poor, which simply means there is not much for rock that you can knap in Alberta. Quartzite is what the majority of the artifacts are made of, and it's very, very crude and very coarse and extremely hard to work with. So if you see a collection of Alberta artifacts, they will be crude. However, in the midst of that, you will see some pretty point made out of something other than quartzite that's absolutely beautiful. This is material, some type of chert or flint, that they obtain through the trade routes. And it speaks to how far and wide that is, because some of the artifacts I've seen in Alberta that have been found here, the material from which they were made doesn't exist within 1,000 miles of here. So I think we're still learning about how vast the trade routes were. This is obsidian. Obsidian is actually volcanic glass, and it's just that. It's a type of glass created by the heating and cooling of the material coming out of a volcano. When you find it, you wouldn't recognize it as anything special. But when you break it open, the glass part of it is very beautiful, and it comes in all different shapes and designs. This is kind of a combination of mahogany, that's what the brown is called, when they have dark streaks in it. And so what I want to show you is the basic principles of how you begin. This would be called a spall, which just means a large flake knocked off of another rock. So you knock a piece off and work that piece, and thus a large rock produces the opportunity for many smaller tools. But there are a few things you have to understand principally about the physics of flint knapping, which means breaking rocks. This little piece of rock represents perfectly the physical function of flint knapping. The physics of flint knapping are controlled by the fact that no matter how you hit the rock, it breaks in a conchoidal fracture. Then this is a perfect picture of what's called a Hertzian cone, which would be a slab of rock that would, say, be laying flat and hit with another rock, such as a BB hitting a glass window at right angles. So if the window is here, the BB hits it here. Where it strikes, there's a tiny little hole, but where it exits, you have a large funnel shape exit hole, which is exactly what produced this. Not a BB gun, but another rock hitting a rock. And so every time you strike a rock, it breaks in this fashion. And what we're trying to do is angle the rock when we hit it to control the angle that is inevitable, okay? So it's not a random act. It's some physical absolutes involved, and I'll show you. Let's take this piece of obsidian. The first thing we have to do is we have to build platforms all the way around this rock so that we have places where we can strike it and absolutely remove mass. So I'm going to very quickly show you how this works. And the object is to zigzag the edges of the rock you're working with first. And so we're going to do that with this copper bopper and percussion napping. So I'm going to hit here, and I'm going to knock this chunk out. All right, then I go down to the low side. You see how, and I'm going to go down and break it off the low side. All right, now I've got over here, I'm going to break it again, and I'm going to turn it over and break it on the other low side, and I'm going to keep doing this all the way around the rock. And what you'll see, it leaves me with a zigzag edge, right? That's what we want. We want a zigzag all the way around this piece of rock. And so I'm going to rather hastily do that so we can get into what the process purchases. But we got to zigzag this edge all the way around. All right. Now, we have a smaller piece, of course, but you'll see this zigzag edge all the way around. It's zigzagged up and zigzagged down. Why is that important? You have to, when flint knapping, imagine an imaginary center line that divides the rock exactly down the center. And these zigzags create platforms on the low and high side of this imaginary line. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use this little piece of a grindstone, and this platform right here, we're going to abrade this, which means we're grinding off any soft edge that's there, because if I hit this edge and don't abrade it, that soft fine edge will act like a cushion and absorb the shock of my bopper instead of letting it run through the rock. So it's the law of flint knapping is always abrade, and I'm cleaning each one of these zigs and zags is a platform that I'll strike. And as you can see, if this is an imaginary center line, I'll just kind of put that center line there. This is below it, okay? Now if I turn this over, it would be above it. So you're always turning the rock to get the low side down. Here's what I've just abraded, and here is a bit of a ridge. And when you strike a rock, the conchoidal fracture wants to follow one of or both of two things, and that is either ridges or natural curves. That's the way we want to break it. And so you can actually direct your strike to remove area around ridges, and we have a shallow ridge here, and we have an abraded tip there. So here's what it looks like, okay? I'm going to support this against my leg, and let's see, which one do I want to hit first? I'll hit this one right here. Okay. I'll show you. I removed all this mass here, and now this ridge is even sharper, which means when I strike it here, it will come down, expand in a bubble shape, and take some of this thickness off. And so I just abrade it first. Make sure that I get all the soft edge off of that. Support it against my leg. Okay. I don't know if you can see this, but here's the outline of what we just removed. It followed and took that whole ridge off. Now this ridge comes down, and this is below center, so if I abrade that, every time you break a piece off, it creates a ridge next door. So you're not only removing mass, but you're also making the platform that you need to continue. So right next door to that, I've abraded this little spot, and it's connected to a ridge that goes both here and here. And if I do my part right, it should remove some of all of that. Okay, came out here like this, did remove part of that. Now, I'm going to turn this over. A ridge that was on the top is now on the bottom, and I'm removing mass. That's the whole objective. Okay, so all that came off, and basically what I'm doing is I'm thinning the rock as I go, with always starting out with the thickness, and you want to get it thin. So now I'm going to go to the other side and abrade the platforms. All right, so here we have one. We have a ridge here and a ridge here. Okay, the bulb is here that it took off. And now I have a point. Look at this ridge. Comes right down, and that's at the lowest point on this platform, which is in a good position to abrade and hit, and it should run down here and take all this ridge off. It's kind of like playing a game of ridges. You're either trying to find them or create them. In flintknapping, the 3 words that get drilled into your head is abrade, abrade, abrade. And people get anxious and want to keep, they break it and it works so good they want to hit it again. Don't hit it again until you abrade it, or you may just ruin what you were just doing. Okay, now this ridge, when I turn this over, runs back this way. So I'm going to strike the same direction that that ridge runs. I'm turning the rock here. Okay, and it took that whole ridge off. That's the interesting thing. When I first started, a guy was teaching me, and he had some Texas rock that was just slate gray, and he had a magic marker, and he would say, I'm going to hit it here, and it's going to break, and he'd make a line and break it, and it would follow his pencil mark, and it made me crazy. I thought it was voodoo or something, but it was nothing more than cooperating with the physics. He knows so well where it was going to break. All right, here's the spot. I've got a big thick spot in here that I want to thin out. And it takes a while to go around and to thin it out. Okay. That one crushed on me. I don't know what I did wrong, but it's okay. Come down here. May have been too close to the center line. There we go. Got a good piece came off there. Good. Got a nice platform down here, plus a ridge. Still want to utilize ridges as much as I can. And that is below center. Okay. Another little one right there. Yeah. When you get that nice click, you know that you've broken something loose. All right, now, I've got a fat spot down under here. Got some natural platforms that I just need to strengthen. Okay, took some off of there. And now what I'm going to do is go nibble along this edge to create a lower platform here to take mass off of here. So this is down below center. Grind that a bit. Good. Took a whole bunch of what I don't need off of there. The guy told me once, he said, well, what you do is you hit one rock with another rock and knock away everything that doesn't look like the point you want to make. I guess that's essentially true. Maybe a little more scientific than that. All right, I have a platform down here hooked to a ridge that splits. So, there we go. And here's the bubble. It went all the way out here. You can see where it expands, and that's the way the shock works. And the shock lines across here showing you that it expanded as it went out into the rock. And so I got a nice piece of reduction off of that. Got to get it thin before we worry about shaping. Okay, that was good. Here I have another natural platform and a ridge all the way to here. So if I do my part right, I should be able to take an awful lot of mass off of this rock. Once again, here's the ridge going all the way across, and it tails out right at the bottom of that platform. So, yeah, followed it. Got this far with it. And, all right. Now I'm doing what's called reading the rock, going along and looking for natural platforms. And if it's not quite far enough from center line, I turn the rock upside down and nibble away at it until I move the platform from up here down to get it below center line. And I've got this dandy fine ridge all the way across here. I braid that good. All right. Once again, there's my ridge. All right. We took it off back to here. Got a platform here that will work. Good. Nice chunk came off of there. Have a platform here. Going along this ridge, I'm going to move it, turn the rock upside down, so to speak. And this is called nibbling, which simply ends up lowering that platform away from the center line so that it doesn't stall out. All right. That's good. And that's good. Okay. So that little fat spot we removed. Here's one that's already been abraded. Crushed a bit, but that's all right. I'm just going to go around this rock and continue to take pieces off of it to get it down thin enough. If you start shaping the point you want to make before you get the thickness reduced, you'll end up with a very thick, fat, unusable point. And so when you do this a lot, I'm explaining or trying to explain as I go my reason for doing that, and ultimately that rock's just spinning in your hands because it becomes second nature to know what to look at. I don't know, it's probably half overall as thick as it was when I started, maybe less. All right, this guy right here, I'm going to come along and thin that edge down. I'm lowering this edge down below center here, and this is the thickest part of the rock, so I'm going to come back here and abrade that spot. There, nice chunk off of that. There's already abraded. Good. And we continue to work our way around, trying to keep the reduction of thickness kind of the same all the way around, so you don't end up with something that's real fat at one end. You just kind of keep turning, and there we go. And the thing is not to get in a hurry. It's better to take a little bit at a time than risk taking a great big bite out of it and completely trashing the rock you're working on. Now I've got a long line here that's below center line, so I can use that whole line as a platform and just go along and right down that line, take it off, and that's good. All right, now rock reading time. I'm looking, all right, here's an edge that's below center. Once again, a long edge, so I should be able to take numerous little flakes off there. Good. Reduce that. And the same thing goes from here. You see, sometimes those flakes will be thinner than a razor blade. And by the way, one thing very unique about obsidian that I'll tell you is that I'm not wearing these gloves for fun. This is how I keep from cutting myself to ribbons, because this flake, an obsidian flake, will break down to a single molecule edge, which is the finest edge humanly possible, or inhumanly possible, I guess we should say, because man can't make anything that'll do that. This is 10 times the sharpness of the sharpest scalpel that a surgeon may ever use. And in fact, some surgeons in unique situations use obsidian instead of metal because it cuts so clean that it heals quicker and doesn't scar as much. So it's been used in some pretty high-tech applications, but all that is to say that when you start knapping obsidian, if you don't have on protective gloves, you are going to bleed. We call it a blood sport. All right, and once again, these little fine flakes, I'm taking off controlled flakes as I go along, not getting in any great rush, but mostly just to, you see that? It's not very thick, but the whole thinning process is about taking off what you want instead of what you wish you hadn't. So it's not something you rush. You'll naturally get faster at it because your ability to know where to strike the rock next gets to be more apparent as you do it. And you can just, so what I'm going to do, now that I've told you the basics, is I'm going to talk less and kind of speed this whole process up. What I'm going to do now, I've got kind of a little corner out here, and I'm going to nibble that down, reshape this piece for length a bit. It's thin enough where I can do that. All right, now I'm going to come down here. When you get to the shaping part of the process, the pointed end is the last thing you work on. The distal end, the bottom end of the piece, is what you want to get ultimately thin first. And the reason is because if you strike this point on the rear end and it's not supported well, it will break the whole piece in half, which I may do yet, especially with obsidian because it's so brittle. But what you want to do is you want to get your distal end thinned before you do this end, so there's enough mass to help reduce the shock that would otherwise break this. So a lot of people get fascinated by the front end and forget how critical it is to have the back end thinned first. And I'm pressing this against my leg real tight now, because if I don't drive some of the shock into this pad and into my leg, I'll get that fracture right across there, and that'll be the end of this whole effort. So I'm going to continue thinning this part of the point. Not worried about, I don't want to have to hit it too terribly hard for the reasons I've just described, but I want to get it thin because this is the end that has to be hafted onto either a spear shaft or an arrow or whatever. So it's got to be thin, and exactly what I'm working on. If I hold it really firm, and I've got it pressed into my hand here to stop that shock that would otherwise break it, and I can take off little fine flakes like you're seeing here and hasten the process somewhat. Okay, got that part pretty thin, so now I'm going to start working the sides of it. While obsidian is a relatively soft material, as like glass, for example, that's the bad news. The good news is it is so sharp that if you're hunting with it, any penetration at all that you get is just devastating because of the wound channel will maximize the blood loss to whatever it gets hit with it, even faster than a metal arrow. Okay, now I'm about to the point where I want to do some shaping, and so I'm going to reach down here with this tool, and I'm actually going to grind it and help shape it. The head of this copper tool is all scarred up, and so it really grabs that edge and enables me to all right, now I'll turn it over and a little more just to get a general shape started, working towards the time when I'll start working with a pressure flaker, slowly getting it into a general shape, thin enough that I can grind that out of the rock now. May have to strike it a few times, but now I've got a general shape started. I want to refine that, still thick enough where I can hit it with a pressure flaker, and you can still see some of the zigzag going on in there, which I'm looking at. There we go. You have to hit it very gently at just the right angle if you're going to hold it up. And I always have a finger under the opposite side of the place I'm striking, so my finger is absorbing the shock. Has to be something there to do that. All right, now here's a problem area because this was a square edge and it's still pretty thick, and so I have what wants to be a platform, but I've got to move that platform this way. Let me turn it around. It's too high. If I hit it this high, it'd either break the whole point or do nothing. So I'm going to move this down by taking my flaking tool here. So this is the problem area, and I want to move this platform that way. So I'm going to put that side up, and I'm going to come along with my pressure flaker, and I'm going to flake that existing edge off, which, as you can see, is moving it this way. I'm going to take a little bit more, make sure that I'm below the center line. And this is all called platform preparation, and it is the most important thing for thinning the rock you're working on. And it's what people do the least, mostly because they just don't want to slow down and take long enough to do what needs to be done. All right, so now I am well below center line with this edge, and so I'm going to set this down. Taking off little bites so I don't, but I've gotten that thick spot gone. That's what I wanted to do. Now I'll re-abrade. Back here I got an ugly corner, but I'm thin enough that I should be able to correct. You see this, I can take that off with my little bopper, I believe. Yeah, there it comes. You can see it folding right off. And I've got another little low spot there. All right. Now, I'm going to grind the rear end, and I'm going to start pressure flaking This is still in the rough, but I'm still thinning. This is pushing into the rock and then away like this. I'm pushing down into it and then to your right as you're observing this, my left as I'm flaking it. And now I'll turn it over. And what I'm going to do is the zigzagging that I've been telling you is so important to build platforms. When you get down to finishing, you want that zigzag to straighten out to a straight line. And so now what I'm doing is I'm taking the zig and the zag out of it and getting it to straighten out and be thin. If when I grind that and abrade it, you can really see clearly where the edge is. Sometimes you can't even see it at all. But now you see that what zigzag is left in there is getting more and more straightened out. So I'm going to always turn it to the low side. And there, got rid of that. Here's the low side. Now when I abrade that, we should be seeing this line getting straighter and straighter. All right, and all I do is keep going to the low side. Wherever it's low, that's where I want to remove some of the rock until I get this in a pretty straight line. I'm getting fairly close. You can see it still. The high spots and the low spots are much smaller and less obvious, but your abrading makes it much easier to identify them. And eventually we straighten that line out. I think it'll be pretty close to straight now. If it's not, we'll take off anything. All right, we've got a hot spot right here. There's a little bit of a dip there on both going both ways. So I'm going to grab that one, take it off here, and let's see, this one here and here. All right. That's got enough done there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to straighten this out now. When it gets down to this point, I can straighten the lines out with pressure flaking as well as any other way. See, I'm taking some of this curvature out and straightening up the line to more of a perfect triangle without the curve in it. The curve is nothing wrong with that, but the kind of point I want to make is going to be an extended triangular shape. So one more pass and I should have that side starting to straighten out pretty good. And of course, the finer the work you're doing, the easier the rock breaks because it's thinner. All right, let's see. All right, it's getting pretty close. All right, work the other side. And there's a low spot here, high spot up here, so I'll have to, on this side, I'm going to start at the base, and I'm going to work the low side, bringing that line back up towards I want it, the center line now to return the edge right to the center instead of being below it like I have while I've been reducing mass. So I'm bringing the center line to the center. This one dips the other way, so I'm going to turn it over. Start to take that off. Okay. Okay. Just looking for anywhere that line departs from the center and remove that. Getting pretty close on this one now. Okay. The center line's getting pretty centered now. Now, getting things pretty straight. And now I'm going to do the delicate part of working this tip to get it nice and sharp, hopefully without breaking it. Yep. Getting pretty pointy. Oh yeah. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to notch it. You have to have a means of winding your sinew, which is to the projectile, which would, in this case would be an arrow, and its process is called hafting, which is just another word for attaching your point to a shaft. And I think I'm just about got that where I want it to be. All right, I'm going to just pause to get my notching tool. My little notching tool is a combination of two things: a very small piece of copper wire over here, and a soft metal nail that I've put on an anvil and flattened out to sort of a screwdriver edge, but a much finer edge. And you don't want to use something really, really hard because you want it to still grab a bit. So basically here, we're going to come into this piece, push in and down, and when you hear that click, that's the rock letting go. And even doing this, it makes a bulb sort of a break. If you look at this side now, you can see that there's a round bubble that's missing that brings this, turning it over, puts the low side here. And so pushing in and down, and every time you do that, it makes another bubble fracture that puts the low side on the other side. And after you break it, I go in there and grind it a little bit, and that just abrades it, so that you, just like when we abrade the it's pretty. Yeah, it's even more turned loose than I wanted, but I'm not going to win a beauty contest with this, but it would make something very, very fatal if it went through it. All right, so I'm going to come along here, put some little notches in that, which also have ability to be pretty lethal. And so now down at the very middle of the bottom, I'm going to put a small notch. And then I'll explain why I put one there. Doesn't have to be very deep. That's all I need. So here against this lighter color, you've got your two side notches and then one in the center of the base. The reason for that is that the piece of hardwood that this is going to be hafted to is going to have a slot in it, but the slot will not be cut across it straight across like this, but it'll be cut at an angle on each side so that in the middle of that notch there'll be a point. And that point is what sits in this notch, which helps stabilize from the bottom of this shifting. And it'll keep it right dead center. And then of course your hafting will come up into this area, come all the way up to here. And the interesting thing is that if you use actual sinew, like the natives did, it's really a marvelous thing to use, because you strip the dried sinew either off the back strap or the leg into little fibers that are similar in size and diameter to a piece of dental floss. And you take a whole bunch of those, and individual pieces you'll then get wet so that they're completely soaked, and then wrap around this your arrow shaft and back and forth through these notches, and either paint it with or pre-dip them in a hide glue, which is what the natives use, that are using rawhide and boiling it until they rendered it down to an actual paste. And you wrap your sinew around the shaft of whatever you're doing, interwrapping with this, and with that glue on it. You don't tie a knot or anything, you just tie it on there wet and leave it, and then it dries and shrinks, and when it shrinks it tightens up like iron. I mean, there's no wobble, wiggle, or nothing, and that's what you got when you're all done. So, for those who are interested in learning to flint knap, there are various sources. One great source is YouTube. There are just scads and scads of videos that are beneficial to beginners. There are books. I think seeing the actual process is better than just reading about it. However, even if you're watching a video, you can't ask it a question. And what I experienced, I would watch a video and I'd have a particular question. See, when you start out, you don't know what you don't know, so you don't know what question to ask. But as you progress, for instance, I watched one video and I saw the man doing something that I wasn't, and I thought, aha. And so I went and tried that, and it sort of worked. And then I came back in 6 months and watched it. I went, aha, aha, because I saw more of what I was not doing. It was there to begin with, but there's nothing like the time on the rocks. It's all about how much time you spend doing it. And if you can get with an accomplished napper, that is the best of all worlds, because you can ask questions. And I would say, in my own experience, that I could have cut years off my learning curve had I had a real live person that knew what they were doing. I didn't meet someone like that till I'd been at it for 5 years. And my learning curve flattened out like crazy when I got to see the whole thing in motion. In fact, when I saw a guy doing it, actually a professional, I mean that he was that good, he was answering questions that I hadn't even had time to ask him just by looking at his hands. So, and I'll say this also, you can, if you're a Facebook junkie, you can go on a Flintknapping, 2 words, Flintknapping Facebook page and join, and you will join over 9,000 nappers from all over the continent and some from overseas. If you have a question, say, I would like to know who in such and such an area might be a napper that'd be willing to show me something, you'll get an answer. And so this is where even social media is huge in terms of locating people that do this, that can help you along. And the good news is that way over 99% of all flint nappers really love teaching newbies. So you're not infringing on anything. Out here, we invite people at no cost to come, watch, learn, and we get a big kick out of seeing them and teaching them a little bit, and next year they come back and learn a little bit more. And so as a rule, it's a very, very generous occupation. Guys like to show you, and it's not about money. None of us get paid to do this, we just like it. And we like showing other people how.